Welcome to Fool's Gold. I'm Cara Cordoni. In a world where everyone sells sparkles, how can we tell glitter from gold? Join me in exploring discernment in the age of grift. The views and opinions expressed on Fool's Gold do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast, its host, or its producers. Any content provided by our guests, contributors, or authors represents their own opinions and experiences and is not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, or entity. Welcome, everybody, to Fool's Gold, Discernment in the Age of Grift. And we are really, really fortunate to have Carol Murchison with us today as our guest. Carol is an inspiring, badass lawyer. She is known, has a nickname of the cult ninja in some circles. And I'm really excited to both introduce you to Carol and her background, how she came to be doing the work that she's doing, and then really get into an educational piece for us as the general public and survivors to understand what does human trafficking mean, what are the definitions of coercion, and then what allows us to hold groups accountable, or actually what's getting in the way. And so we can talk about opportunities or maybe places of leverage so that we can make meaningful cultural shifts and do better. So with that, I bring you Carol Murchison. If you'd like to further introduce yourself, Carol.
I don't think that I could even surpass ninja, that. I'm delighted to be here, Cara.
Wonderful. And so I'm really curious, going all the way back, how did you come into law at all? What was your vision as a young person? How long have you been doing law? Yeah.
Well, so it's interesting because I did not come into law as a young person. I actually went to law school when I was in my early 40s, if you can imagine. And it's an interesting because we're speaking about culture in a certain way today. I think it's interesting because when I graduated from law school, from college and thought about law school, approximately 3 or 4 women would be in a class of 500 men
Wow.
in law school,
And what
right?
year was that?
That would have been 1968.
Wonderful.
And so I looked at that and I thought, God, who wants to do that? I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
That wasn't who I was in
Yeah.
1968. And so I did other things. And I think when I was approaching my 40th birthday, my husband said to me, "Well, what do you want to do? After you turn 40, what do you want to do with the rest of your life?" And I said, "I want to be a lawyer, but it's too late.
Oh,
It's too late. I'm 40. I'm going to be 40. You have to take the
right.
LSATs, and then you have to go to law school for 3 years. And you have 2 children. And, I mean,
Yes.
it just was an impossible, it felt impossible. But in fact, it wasn't impossible. And so I did. I went to law school in Boston. I went to Northeastern Law
Okay.
School, which is a wonderful law school where we took classes for 1 quarter and then we worked for a quarter. And it's a
Okay.
public interest law school. So it really is training lawyers to work in the public interest in DA's offices, in poverty law,
Oh,
in,
wow.
in all of those kinds of situations. Um, but I was older and I had 2 children and I needed to put them through college. And so I didn't go that route. I went the route of I have to make money, I have
Mm-hmm.
to support, my family and do those
Yeah.
kinds of things. And so I I ended up actually being a partner in several very large law firms. And I enjoyed that work. I felt that it was good work. It was, in fact, um, work in the public interest. But at a certain point, I got tired of it and I retired and I
Okay.
moved to Mexico.
Okay.
And from Mexico, I continued to do training because what I was doing at the end was a little bit well like what you did in one of the situations that you were in, which is
Uh-huh.
investigating sexual misconduct in the workplace. And then in 2017, I think 2018, um, I agreed to do a pro bono free project investigation of a Buddhist community in Canada where
Uh-huh.
women were saying that the leader had been sexually assaulting women. And I was concerned for them because they didn't have any evidence of that.
Mm,
And so I didn't want them to be sued. I didn't want people who were not guilty of anything to be slandered and defamed. And so I agreed to do an investigation. What I found was my first introduction to what I would think of now as like cult like organizations.
uh, uh-huh.
And that created a whole ripple effect. And here we are in 2026, and I'm still doing that work. So I didn't come to it the easy way, Kara.
Yeah.
I didn't say to myself at 25 years old, I want to be, a cult
Mhm.
ninja.
Right.
Not at all. And in
Yeah.
fact, even now, I think of it really as just accountability
Right.
across the board for people who've been harmed. That's a
Right.
long-winded story, but I've had a
No, it's
long life, you
fantastic.
know?
You have, and, the one piece I'd love to loop back to, because I think we talked about this previously, was the impact of Anita Hill,
Yes.
and,
Mm.
would you touch on that a
Yes,
little bit?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was a lawyer at the time of Anita Hill, and, a couple of things that I would say is that at that time, which was early 1990s, I think,
Yep.
um, a couple of things. Number 1 was, um the Senate committee did not believe her. Not even the Democrats believed her. I've never forgiven Joe Biden for for not believing
And
Anita Hill. You
right,
know,
and context, this was Anita Hill stepped forward, um, when Thomas Clarence was
yes,
getting, put onto the Supreme Court. So these were the
right,
confirmation hearings for
right.
people that are not familiar with why
Anita
we know
Hill.
about Anita
Yes,
Hill.
right. That's right.
Exactly, and so she spoke out really courageously about this ongoing harassment,
Harassment.
and yet I think what's so important to understand is that it was new to call that
Yes.
harassment.
Yes, that is exactly the other point that I was going to make is that there was this tremendous divide. There was this divide of men who'd never heard of anything like this, who literally were saying this can't possibly be true. At the same time, there was a huge group of women who were saying, "Welcome to my world." And so, where I was practicing law in Massachusetts, the commission that handles those kinds of things in the workplace, they had to put in a new telephone system, is what someone told me, because they had so many calls from women who said, "Wow, I'm just understanding now that I might have a claim." At the same time, my mother-in-law, who was, what she must have been 70 at that time, said, "Oh, yeah, that happened to me dozens of times." And so we had this tremendous
Yeah.
divide, right? Where, people who had never experienced this, i.e., men, were making a decision to not believe Anita Hill. And I have to say that I think she's a tremendous for your listeners who really don't know who she is, they should search into this because she's a tremendous role model.
Yeah.
I think for all of us for having held her center.
Yeah.
Had no, big anger, big rage, big, you have to be extremely good at processing your emotions to have gone through what she went through and come out of it even, barely functional, which she's way more than that since she became
She
a
is.
professor, and
Yeah.
and I think she teaches at Brandeis. So yeah, that's a kind of a beginning. But at the same time, what I would say, drawing it back to some of the topics that we want to talk about today, is that we have a tremendous divide on coercion, on
Okay.
the issue of coercion, right?
Right.
We have people who feel like they have never been coerced, right? And that they would never, for example, join a cult or
Right.
be involved in a high demand, high control organization. And
Right.
then we have people who've been in these situations
Yeah.
and understand what that kind of coercion feels like.
Right. And can you, for us, define coercion? Um, yeah, there's a legal definition. There's a lot to unpack there that I
There
don't
is.
think we understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So, first of all, we don't really have any laws that make coercion illegal. So there isn't any law that says if you coerce this other person, and here's the definition of coercion, you're going to be either guilty in a criminal way or you're going to be liable under a civil
Mhm.
standard, okay? Because
Okay.
we have the criminal courts and we have the civil courts. So we don't really have any laws that do that. What we have are laws in which coercion becomes a part, maybe we could say a part of the proof.
Okay.
So if we're beginning to see coercion come up in some states' domestic violence laws
Okay.
because some coercive relationships are no different than coercive organizations, right? It's the same dynamic, whether
Yep.
it's 50 people or whether it's two people. And so
Mhm.
coercion is a part of a few laws, including the Trafficking Act, which you talked about before, which we
Right.
should talk about more because it's been used a great deal
Okay.
in cults and in
Yeah.
religious groups that have become coercive, all
Yeah.
kinds of groups. But
Yeah.
coercion, there's no real definition because there's some kind of line. You know, it's like
Right.
from not coercive to the other end, really coercive. And
Yeah.
of course, in the legal system, it's up to a jury to decide whether there was enough coercion to negate consent.
Okay.
Okay, so let me go back and give you an example.
Yeah.
So I have investigated and litigated a number of spiritual groups that I would call cult like.
Uh-huh.
And I say that with kind of air quotes because the law doesn't either have a definition of cult,
Definition.
right? So I call them high demand, high control. So that's what we're looking at. What are the
Mhm.
demands that are made of people?
Mhm.
Um, and so the more demands and the more controls, then the more likely it is that you didn't have an opportunity to consent to whatever you were being
Mhm.
asked to do. Under the
Mhm.
Human Trafficking Act, it's sex
Mhm.
and labor. So,
Okay.
for example, you could have a group where people are in an isolated compound.
Okay.
They're uh, they're not allowed to go out.
Yeah.
They have bought into something. Nobody joins a cult. That's what people like to say, right? We don't join a
Yes.
cult. We join something that we think is going to be fabulous. It's
Mhm.
going to be the answer to our problems. That's a kind of fool's gold in a way that we
Yes.
find out.
Yes.
And so there's a compound, people are not allowed to leave. If you can't challenge the leader is an authoritarian, the leader has the answer to all life's questions. The more what we do as lawyers who are
Mhm.
litigating these cases is we're building the coercion that negates consent. Because
Okay.
think about it, if you're on a jury or if you're a judge, the first thing you say is, "Why didn't you leave?"
Right.
So I think you've been in situations where you did not feel that you had an opportunity to consent.
Right.
There was some element of coercion
Yeah.
and you couldn't leave. But you know that what people are going to say who do not understand coercion is you could have left. The door was not locked,
Exactly.
the gate was open.
Mhm.
You could get in a car and go away. But
Right.
that is not recognizing what brain science tells us,
Right.
which is that all of us are subject to coercion.
Yeah.
Our brains have certain patterns in the way that they respond to shame, to guilt, to love bombing,
Right.
all kinds of things. So
Mhm.
there's no definition of coercion. It's a kind of spectrum.
Okay.
So we have to look as lawyers, for example, we look at the situation and we say, how much coercion was there? Could I persuade a jury
Right.
that may not understand what this is? Could I persuade them that this person did not have consent? And we have only for your listeners who maybe followed the P. Diddy trial,
Yeah.
he was being tried in a criminal case,
Mhm.
which is a different standard, a different burden of proof. It's more, it is beyond a reasonable doubt. The
Right.
prosecutor has to prove, right? And so what they were trying to prove was that the woman, his partner, was not able to leave the
Right.
relationship because she was
Right.
being coerced.
Right.
So that was an example of it that he was being tried under the Trafficking Act for sex trafficking,
Right.
coercion.
And so that's so interesting because it is, in relation to consent and the idea of manufactured consent, I think is something that is helpful for those of us who have been through these systems. In my
Mhm.
case, multiple times, right? My first husband, whatever, the miracle of love, this stuff. And and so a lot of us are in there and they're like, well, no, I wasn't I wasn't coerced because I said yes. But when I stepped back, I did not have informed consent.
Mhm.
I did not know what was coming. I did not know, right, any of these things. And so for me, that's been a understanding consent from that. Was it manufactured so that I
Yes.
believed something that was actually deceptive? And so that
Mhm.
I'm like being fooled,
Mhm.
right? To be like, no,
Right.
and with this whole I'm 100% responsible for everything that runs through so many of these coercive spiritual organizations.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's really helpful as people process like consent. I mean, the other word that pops to mind that I know we don't use is brainwashing, right? That's
Yes.
not a
Mhm.
legal term.
No.
It's very, we don't have, it's but there are, I think what we're trying to get at is, are there ideas, emotional manipulation, psychological pressure that then we do things we wouldn't normally do?
Yes. Exactly. And I think that's why the world of coercion where we are right now, whether, and we'll talk about accountability, but whether we can get accountability or not under the law, I think it's really important for people who have been in a situation where they're asking themselves, where they're maybe beating themselves up saying, well, yeah, I
Right.
said yes, you
Right.
know, but they do not understand the elements of coercion. And I think that it is not until we get this information to people in in a variety of ways that we're really going to help people avoid coercion,
Right.
recognize it when you're in the situation. But I think almost as importantly, perhaps more importantly, is to be able to say to themselves, okay, I didn't consent. Not keep running the tape, in our head
Mhm.
over and over that says, well, I'm responsible for what happened to me.
Right.
It's not a healing tape. And I think
Right.
it's really important to understand coercion. So you and I both belong to ICSA.
Right. The International Cultic Studies
Cultic studies is
Association.
a right. And so that's an example of where we're looking at coercion from all different angles. So there are academics that we rely on to run studies on
Uh-huh.
people. There are brain scientists that are looking at, a little bit like this is your brain on coercion. What
Yes.
happens, right?
Yeah.
We have uh, psychologists and psychiatrists who are studying it from their perspective. We
Mhm.
have therapists who are treating people who are in these positions and who are beating themselves up saying, well, yeah,
Right.
I agreed to this bad thing that happened to me.
Mhm.
And then there are lawyers like me who are there saying, I need all of you. I need the I need the academics who are doing research. I need the
Yeah.
brain science who can tell juries what happens to
Right.
people when they're being coerced. I need therapists who can treat our clients who are out on the rigorous road of litigation. We need all of these people in order to have accountability because it's
Mhm.
all about helping the public understand coercion, right?
Mhm.
It's like, for me, it's like this, Kara. I can remember back, and it's not that far uh, back in history. You'll remember too that when a woman was raped, what she was asked was, what were you wearing?
Still today.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And so,
Mhm.
but we have educated a large amount of the population that that is not an okay question.
Right.
It doesn't get us anywhere.
Right.
What we need to do is to help people understand that, for example, a client of mine once said, if I had been in a dark alley and someone had come up
Mhm.
behind me with a gun
Yep.
and then raped me, I
Mhm.
would know that I didn't consent.
Right.
But that's physical harm that's threatened. And what we're talking about with coercion is psychological harm.
Right.
And so the same physical violation
Right.
occurs in both of those
Right.
circumstances. But in the one in which it was psychological coercion that led to her being involved in that, we
Yeah.
don't credit that in the way that we would if it was a gun or a knife. That's where we
Right.
need to go to get accountability.
Gotcha. Right. And so let's see, you talked a little bit about trafficking in the legal sense,
Yes.
and I'm curious because we're going to talk about criminal versus civil a little bit
Yes.
more. Now, my understanding is that trafficking would be criminal law only, and there would be a different approach from the civil. perspective. You can okay, you're shaking
Yeah.
your head. Set me
Yeah, right?
straight. Yeah.
Absolutely. So there, I think it did start out as criminal, and it is
Okay.
criminal, but
Yeah.
it is also civil. So let's talk about the difference between those two
Okay.
things,
Yeah.
because it's amazing how conflated these can be in people's minds. Because hopefully, in their lifetime, they've not been involved in either
Right.
the criminal justice system or the civil justice system, because bad
Right.
things haven't happened to them. So here's what it is: criminal justice system. It's like one, imagine it like it's a superhighway. It's
Okay.
leading to a conclusion, and there are lots of little obstacles that you have to get through to go there, to get there. That's the trial. So you have
Okay.
to go to the police. They have to do an investigation. They have to refer to a district attorney. They might have to seat a grand jury. They have to decide whether they have enough evidence to prove, and here's the standard, beyond a reasonable doubt
Uh-huh.
that whatever you're saying happened, happened. And if they can't do that, they're not going to take your case. If they can do that, you are going to go through the criminal justice system. There may be a plea bargain.
Uh-huh.
You may, as you and your listeners may remember, the Stanford swimmer trial. Do you
Yes.
remember that?
Of
Where,
course.
yes, where a woman took her case all the way to a jury. There were witnesses, Kara.
Yeah.
And so they found him guilty. And then the very last piece of the criminal justice system was that the judge didn't put him in jail because he didn't want to ruin his future. So there is somebody, bless her heart, and I think she's written a book, also an amazingly strong person, who
Uh-huh.
went through this very difficult process to not get accountability at the end. That happens a lot in the criminal justice system. We are not good. Again, this is one of these cultural divides. We are not good at bringing rape to justice in the criminal justice system. All right, so that's the criminal system. Civil system, you have your own lawyer. So
Okay.
the criminal justice system is really run by the state,
Right.
or in the case of federal law, by the federal government, because what they're really saying is these laws are in there to make our society safer. And so they're
Right.
going to be governed by the government. And so the district attorney is a person, he's a lawyer, she's a lawyer who is operating for the government. In the civil justice system, we operate for our client. So we're
Mm.
not going to settle if the client doesn't want to settle. We
Mm-hmm.
are going to settle if the client wants to settle. We are serving the client. So it's a very, while it's the same law, for example, the human
Okay.
trafficking law,
Okay.
very much the same,
Yeah.
but it's being litigated in a different way. That is, a person comes to us and says, "This is what happened to me." We look at it and we say, "Can we check off all these boxes of coercion?"
Okay.
Right? Can we check off the other boxes that the law requires? And can we get the proof of that? And
Yeah.
and then if we take the case, then we have to prove, not beyond a reasonable doubt, but more likely than not,
Mm.
a very different standard.
Mm-hmm.
Right? More likely than not is like 50% plus a smidge, right? If
Right.
you were doing it on a scale.
Right.
Very different from beyond a reasonable doubt, because we're putting people in jail. We want to be
Right.
sure when we put people in jail that we've tried our darndest not to make a mistake. And
Yeah.
so it's got to be like 90% or something beyond a
Right.
reasonable doubt. And look, at the end of the criminal justice system, if the victim is successful, the perpetrator goes to jail. At the end
Right.
of the civil justice system, which is also not a perfect system, um, th- there's money. That's it.
Okay. That's it.
So a lot of people will say, well, I want to take this organization down.
Right.
But we can't do it in the civil justice system. We have to do it
Right.
one person at a time, $1, at a time, because that's what
Right.
we're litigating is that there, and it's a good thing to litigate for because people who are harmed deserve to be compensated for their harm. When
Right.
people were aware of it, when we can prove all the elements of a case.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I guess it brings me to, like, who wrote the law for who?
Well, a very interesting question because the same people who did not believe Anita Hill,
Yes.
which is the senators in
Yeah.
Washington D.C., are the same people who are writing our laws. Obviously, not the same individually, but that is the
Sure.
same group of people. Laws are written by legislatures, and the federal laws are written in Washington D.C., and the state laws are written, by the senators and the representatives that go to that state capital and legislate. They legislate law. That's who's
Mhm.
doing it. And so that's why, for me, I have to say, people like you who are doing podcasts,
Mhm.
journalists, media people, documentary people, um, ICSA, all of
Mhm.
these organizations are helping to educate the public. And that includes our legislators who create
Right.
law. It also
Yeah.
means that they're educating juries
Yeah.
who decide.
Right.
The jury who decided in the P. Diddy case, at least on the human trafficking, the sex trafficking part with his partner, did not believe she was coerced. Simple as that.
Right.
And so, yes, we can put an expert up in front of a jury to tell them things about
Yeah.
coercion. Wasn't allowed in that case.
Yeah.
But what we'd really like to have is people who understand that you don't ask a rape victim what was she wearing, and you
Yeah.
recognize the effect that coercion has on behavior, that it
Mhm.
negates consent. That's what we need.
Mhm. Mhm. Which, brings it back to the culture in general, which is the normalization of objectification
Hmm.
and minor to major sexual assault on
Yes.
women and children, right?
Yes. Hmm.
Especially any gendered child is
Yes.
really at risk. And I guess that's where it's like, wow, we really are still trying to make good on the culture shift, on a shift out of normalized misogyny, really, into that place of care and equality. Um, and so it can be really discouraging, I think.
Oh,
I mean, I
yes.
look at, Keith Raniere from NXIVM. He's in prison. Hallelujah. And
125 years, by the way.
right? With, like, extra years if he gets out, like, parole for 20 years. I don't know. It's yeah. They threw the way the key I believe he's actually exhausted his appeals at this point, that
Hmm.
it took
Hmm.
so many years, right? Um, and we have Nicole Daedone, who is in
Yes.
jail awaiting
Yes.
sentencing, from the
One
OneTaste,
taste. Yeah.
organization. So we are seeing progress
Yes.
on holding, group leaders that are particularly coercive. And I believe that the labor laws played into both of those, right? So
Hmm.
part of when we define a high control group or a cult is we're looking at, is there labor being extracted? Is there free labor?
Exactly.
Yeah. So can you speak about that a little bit?
Yes. Oh, yes, because that's another part of the Human Trafficking Act. I have to say, in my family, I'm known as a very strange person who would rather look at civil RICO and the Human Trafficking Act than television. I mean, it's
Yes.
like very exciting. You have to have a certain mental, a, 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 desire for that kind of thing. But yes, so the Trafficking Act, as I said, based on coercion. So what it's really saying is, and you know what? Let me give you another example that will be
Okay.
more recent. than Anita Hill. And there, by the way, the coercion was we want our jobs. We need our jobs.
Right.
I'm being
Right.
coerced to accept this because I have to work here. And it's coming
Right.
from the person who has the power to fire me. That's the essence of workplace harassment law. So we
Mhm.
understand that where jobs and money are concerned. We
Mhm.
haven't translated this out to these other situations, right? Okay, so let's
Mhm.
talk about forced labor. So, forced labor and the Trafficking Act and sex trafficking. So, the very first thing is that trafficking, I don't know why they named it trafficking
Right.
because
It's confusing.
it is confusing and confusing to lawyers too and judges, because there obviously is trafficking in the sense that there are women and children who are swept up in some way,
Mhm.
and brought in across state lines or international lines and
Right.
are in a enslavement situation where
Yes.
they are both sex slaves and labor slaves. Okay, there's
Yes.
no question about that. But the Trafficking Act was written very broadly, deliberately by Congress. Again, those are the people who make our laws, and I think that they, as you can imagine, they didn't like human trafficking. They couldn't find a
Mhm.
justification for it.
Mhm.
It just was so unappealing and concerning and harmful that they said,
Mhm.
let's have this law and we're going to make it really, really broad so that we can capture all
Mhm.
of these people who are doing that. Okay. So the trafficking part turns out to be not really anything at all, meaning that you don't have to cross state lines. So the way that I learned this is I was reading when Harvey Weinstein, because we can all remember Harvey, and he was he had a number of cases brought against him, and they were using the Trafficking Act. And I
Mhm.
read that in a newspaper, and I thought, what didn't I understand about Harvey?
Mhm.
I mean, the whole truck and the over the state lines, and
Right.
I didn't know that about him. And so I I kind of dug into it a little further, actually talked to the lawyers who were representing some of the women against him in New York, and learned that the trafficking part is really almost everybody could check off that box. The
Right.
trafficking part says you are engaged in interstate commerce. Well, anybody who has a cell phone is probably in interstate commerce, and certainly Harvey was in interstate commerce. So that's like a given. You
Okay.
can check that off right away. And then
Okay.
what's the rest of it? Well, Harvey is a perfect example of the rest of it. Enticing someone into what's called a commercial sex act. Now, commercial sex act, probably that's again quite misleading because it sounds like prostitution, right?
Right.
But it's been broadened over the years to mean a quid pro quo. So means this for that. It can be
Okay.
anything of value. So in Harvey's case, he was saying to people, you have sex with me and I will give you a an interview with a very famous producer, and this will
Right.
make your acting career. He does that by enticing, and then he uses fraud or coercion
Mm.
in order
Mm.
to kind of complete this sex trafficking cycle.
Right.
And so it's very broad. We've used the Sex Trafficking Act, uh, and I can't even count how many times, against cult like, high demand, high control organizations because
Yeah.
they use coercion to enact either sex. Sometimes in some of these groups, it's sex for enlightenment.
Yeah.
If you have sex with the guru,
Mhm.
you will speed up your enlightenment. When in
Right.
fact what it does is cause you a great deal of psychological harm. That
Mhm.
we've used the Trafficking Act in these cases
Okay.
because it is so broad. Same with
Yeah.
forced labor. You are enticed, coerced for free labor. Almost every high demand, high control group, and let's talk about what that means, but what every single one of them, almost every one of them, I would say, uses free labor, and they are coerced into a better world. We're making a change in the world. These are things that are going to benefit you, and you're going to work for free. We're all going to work for free. But surprise, surprise, the leaders of the group get wealthy because, as it turns out, and this isn't hard to understand, not having any labor costs is a wonderful business plan. It's not that great for people, but it's a very good business plan. And so the law also, you can't say, I didn't want to do this, but I just stayed. You have to say, I was coerced, and you have to show the coercion.
Right. Right. I mean, that's the thing is a lot of us are like, of course I'll volunteer time
Yes,
for the cause, for the ideology. And then what you come to realize is that the energy and time that you volunteered wasn't for the betterment often of the
yeah,
cause or
yes,
yourself. It was extracted into someone
yes.
else's value, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And and again, as we said in the beginning about being on a spectrum, it
Yeah.
operates on a spectrum. So, for
Yeah.
example, I have had child, and I have one now, child forced labor cases. Um, but a child, like back here at the one end of the spectrum, a child, let's say a child of 14, says to his mother and father, I'm going to sue you under the Forced Labor Act because you're forcing me. Right. This is like
To
something my
vacuum.
children would have said, right,
Yeah.
to vacuum and unload the dishwasher.
Yeah.
It's a federal offense.
Yeah.
Um, Not really, right? Because, rapidly the law had to figure out, well, okay, that's not for commercial benefit. So
Okay.
you can't sue your parents because they made you do chores. And so there's been a lot of case law on that, not because children actually do sue their parents, but because other kind of enslavement situations, sometimes of foreign workers, have been
Okay.
in homes doing vacuuming,
Yeah.
unloading the dishwasher, etc. And the
Right.
court has said, no, that's forced labor. That can be forced labor, but you're distinguishing it between something that has a commercial benefit for the
Okay.
people that are forcing the labor and that
Yeah.
doesn't. So mom and dad presumably don't have any big, I mean, maybe there's an indirect financial benefit in not having to
Right.
hire somebody, but you can see that ends up being at that end of the spectrum. The other end of the
Right.
spectrum is where a little bit like I was saying before, where there's a group where they're enclosed, where they have done forced labor. I'd like somebody to do a study on how long you can be doing forced labor before that in itself becomes inescapable. So let's just say
Ooh,
if you go into a situation and some religious organizations, and I'm not talking about volunteering 2 hours a week for your church,
I get it.
right? Right. We're talking
Yeah.
about people who are encased in
Yeah.
a situation that they can't get out of. And I think I'd like to see somebody do some studies on how long you are in there before you are unable to leave, even if the door was open, because you have
Right.
no money.
Yeah.
You have no means of leaving.
Right.
You can't call a taxi because you don't have a credit card. You don't have cash. You don't have a job. If you don't have family support,
Mhm.
there's a certain amount of time after having been in a labor extraction situation that the situation itself becomes its own coercion, meaning
Right.
there's no way for you to escape from it.
Right. Wow.
So there are all of those kinds of things. There
Yeah.
are oaths that people take. I
Yeah.
will serve you for my lifetime.
Right. Or in
And then,
Scientology, what is it, a billion years in the Sea
yeah,
Org? It's
yes,
it's a long
yeah,
commitment.
it's a long commitment indeed. And, but, I mean, to people's credit, this is not a bad thing. People say, well, I'm a
Right.
person who follows my commitments. I uphold
Mhm.
them. And then if you don't, or you dissent or you question, you are shamed, you are guilted, you are punished, you are
Mhm.
shunned, you are
Mhm.
ostracized. And so we do those situations over and over again, and we find that we no longer have a dissent because we
Mhm.
know what the consequence is. It's
Mhm.
not, I feel like saying it's not rocket science that would happen, because
Mhm.
as children, we may have grown up in households where we were not allowed to
Exactly.
dissent. And we
Absolutely.
know that we lost our voices through that process. And that's what happens to people.
And then for many of us, it is in your church where it's all you
Yes.
need to accept it, affirm it. You can't ask questions, or there's
Yes.
varying degrees. So that, and then depending on the workplace, how hierarchical or normalized abuse, we can argue that capitalism in itself has set up a system of coercion because we have to do it to survive.
Yes. Exactly. And
And so,
so,
yeah.
yeah, that's an interesting point, actually. And so all the laws are, in effect, just trying to give some small modicum of support back
Mhm,
to people, right?
mhm.
But we said the problem is that it's very difficult to hold people accountable. It's difficult.
So, stepping back to defining high control group,
Yes.
or
Yes.
yeah, what do you think
Well,
is important for that
yeah.
definition for us?
I would say that if any of your listeners, and if you are interested, and you may have already done this, I would encourage people to go and Google the BITE model. That's
Yes.
BITE, the BITE model.
Yes.
And I think that that is very helpful. So, this is a model that Dr. Hassan created. He himself had been in a cult, and he's a psychologist. And so, the BITE model has broken down into 4 quadrants where
Mhm,
you can look at these quadrants and see, did I experience this? Did I
mhm,
experience that? And you can go down through the 4 quadrants, and they are
mhm.
divided like this. Behavior. How
Okay.
much control was placed on my behavior? And then Dr. Hassan has given us a whole list of things that are common to high
Right.
demand, high control organizations. And so you can look at them. I have my clients do this. Look at this and
Yep,
tell me, what have
yep.
you experienced? Because the word coercion is just 3 syllables. It's one word. It
Mhm.
doesn't even begin to encompass what
Right.
people have experienced. So there's behavior, there's information,
Yeah.
there is thought, and there is emotion. And these are 4 quadrants in which high demand, high control organizations exert coercion. So
Right.
your behavior has to be a certain way. The information, so many of high demand, high control corporate organizations have, you can't get on the internet.
Mhm.
You are only allowed to have access to the information that they give you. That's a very high control of information.
And they'll do it in the way, like, there are people in compounds who literally cannot, and then those of us who go through the great experience are often implanted with, "Oh, don't bother. Those are just people who couldn't handle it. You're just
Yes.
gonna get distracted." And so again, I wasn't physically restrained,
Right.
let's say after the miracle of love, I just in my open state, right? I know, miracle of love, so
Yeah, I
cruel.
love that.
Uh, friggin' cult.
Uh, uh,
And yeah, so they just implanted that in an open state, when I was exhausted and they're just telling you all these things. And so you kind of just accept them in. And it was like, no, there's nothing for you on the internet.
right.
None of that's accurate. None of that's important. That's just the haters. When you're doing amazing work in the world, the
Mhm.
haters will show up. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, so that is a form
Yes.
of information
It
control.
is. It is a form of information control, and it goes along with a lot of other things, which are shaming and guilt. So,
Mm,
if you're in a big group, and I think this is the thing, I think we've all experienced this, even if we haven't been in what we could consider a high demand, high control organization.
hmm
We've all been in a large group of people, let's say, where someone says something, and you think to yourself, "I don't think that's right." But you are not going to raise your hand and ask about it because you know that that is not permitted, right? So people, we know these things. We don't have to be told. We don't have to have somebody write us a letter and say, if you disagree with me, I am going to shame you in front of a lot of people and you'll be, and then you won't do it the next time. No, they don't have to tell
hmm
us that. We know that as human beings, and we alter our behavior to that.
hmm
And so the coercion can be small. It can be, I remember my daughter was in like junior high school, and we were in some kind of school thing in an auditorium. And it was like the children were getting awards, and we were the loving parents there, and my husband and I were sitting in the back, and the woman came up to the microphone. You couldn't hear anything that she said. And so she talked for a long time, and nobody did a thing. And finally, my husband went like this, "We can't hear you." And I was mortified,
Oh,
right?
wow.
Because it's like not permitted to do that
Yeah.
in my world, right? That
Yeah.
is something that is going to bring you shame. That is going to bring you, the condemnation of your community of junior high school parents.
Right.
I
Right.
mean,
Well,
we all experience it.
and the social science research,
Yes.
right, has like we might miss it in ourselves because we are designed to make sense of what we
Mhm.
do. So we rationalize, we have all these things. When you put us in these, studies and you look at large group, influence, we lie,
Oh,
we
yes.
we we conform,
Yes.
and so this idea, especially in these high control groups, whether it's personal development, spiritual development, they often harp on your responsibility and your individuality, right? They act like there is no communal impact or influence. We
Mhm.
talk about undue influence is
Mhm.
another
Mhm.
way of understanding it. And so, I felt so much shame and embarrassment as I've been coming out of this until I was able to start getting those structural
Yes.
understandings, right? The bite model, comparing it to other organizations where I'm not so
Mhm.
deep in. So I'm
Mhm.
automatically protecting it because I've internalized the shame, the gaslighting, and for me, especially with this last group with ISTA was, the hook that I was like, not only part of this group, but I could like be part of the leadership in this group and I could reap these benefits. And so that my attachment to that and the way they leverage that
Yes.
with people is part of understanding if you're in an organization that has integrity, transparency,
Mhm.
being able to verify things versus it's like, oh, you work up by paying us to come be an assistant and find someone to take you under their wing. It's all very vague and messy, um, and many high control groups, will
Yes.
play with that gray area.
Yeah. Yeah,
where we project.
that's right. So
Mhm.
we're looking at it's the same thing. It's looking at behavior.
Yeah,
How does your behavior have to conform? You should
yeah.
not be screaming out, I can't hear you in the junior high school auditorium. Or at least at least in my world, which was probably, I mean, obviously that's the kind of thing that parents instill in their children. You have
Yeah,
to
right,
conform, you have to be part of the
right.
group. So it's
Yeah.
behavior, it's information.
Mhm.
It's like these people are lying, they're just jealous, whatever, or a complete um a complete fence around the information that you can receive.
Mhm.
There is coercion of thought, what
Mhm.
you are allowed to think, and emotion. You know, so
Right.
how many? I can't tell you how many groups that I've looked at that it's like you cannot be negative. You have to be happy all the time,
Yeah.
and or you have to have a certain emotion related to the leader.
Yep.
All of these things, so we have, again, that spectrum where we have organizations that are highly coercive in controlling people's behavior, their information, their thought, their emotions, and it operates along a spectrum,
Yes.
but it's all there. And until
Yeah.
we recognize it, then we make the same mistakes over and over again. I would love for people to.
Mhm.
I wish that I'm always looking for more research on this that will help us, put
Mhm.
out to public the role of coercion in
Mm.
our lives, so that you could identify it,
Right.
and then you
Right.
could make a decision, right? An
Right.
informed decision. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, this is a little coercive, but I'm willing to have that, because I think I'm going to get this
Take that
benefit.
risk.
Yeah,
Right.
right. But that you could look at it and see the the pieces of it
Yeah.
as they're occurring.
Yeah. Then some of these groups wouldn't fill their seats because once you know what's really happening, they're not gonna get your money and your time.
Well, it is absolutely the case. And
Yeah.
it's like when we're talking about the law is just one, like avenue
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
accountability. It has many structural defects. But I
Mhm.
think that what I have seen in the last almost decade that I've been doing this is that one of the big outcomes that we should want is obviously to hold people accountable.
Yeah.
But when we can't get that, which we often can't, then we want people to be able to be healed from the experience. We want people
Yes.
to not blame themselves. We want
Right.
people to say, I hear so many people that say to me, if I, people will say to me, what are you doing, Carol?" I'm not in a rocking chair knitting these days, and so they're like, what is it that you do? And I tell people and they say, oh, that's just terrible. But that would never happen to me.
Oh,
I
really?
would never be fooled. And I smile, and it just depends on how I feel whether I take that on or not. But the reality is that people who enter these groups are usually people who are intelligent,
Mhm.
idealistic, looking for a
Mhm.
better world, looking for a way to change the world in a better way. Many positive, in fact, almost 100% positive things that person is looking
Yeah.
for. And
Yeah.
yet, what we tend to do as a society is say, well, I don't know why she didn't just walk away, instead of pointing the finger at the perpetrators.
Right.
That's a big cultural thing that we have to get
Right.
over.
I still fall into it. My shame, embarrassment,
Yeah.
before the cult, right? Like
Yes.
this was like part of what my vulnerability or my humanity was. And then, so much of it, and I still catch it where I'm like, even with the podcast, it's like, well, how do we discern? But, but it's not my lack of discernment if I have been bold faced lied to
Hmm.
and marketed, love bombed, manipulated, misinformed. Like, I am developing skills to be less likely to be
Hmm.
manipulated by that.
Yes.
But this idea, right? Like, oh, well, if women just wore the right thing or did this, or if we just automatically psychically knew that that group had bad intentions. And it's like, wait a minute,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Like, how do we
It's
pull
putting the
out of
blame
it
in the right. Yeah, it's the
in the
blame
right
in the wrong face.
place?
Yeah. Yep.
Right.
Yes.
And we're seeing that all around the world of really, right? Trying
Oh
to,
my goodness. Yes, we
yeah,
are.
put the blame.
And just, when I think that we've passed some cultural, like bad thing that we used to do, then it pops up again.
Right.
Like somebody
Right.
saying to reporter, you don't smile enough. Hello. How many of us have been told, when
Yes.
we've been, completely, mistreated that we don't
Mm-hmm.
smile. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
come on. So we need
Mm-hmm.
to me, I'm really in love with coercion study in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different ways because I think that it is one of the ways that we could, at least for our own individual selves, understand the journey that we were in.
Yeah, I mean, and just to loop it back, like if I'm walking down the street as a woman and there's a guy approaching and I don't smile and he makes a comment, why don't you smile? And there's a dynamic that you want to control my behavior. And
Yes.
there is potentially, depending on the demeanor, but to some degree, a threat
Yes.
of violence or
Mhm. Mhm.
the
Yes.
stranger I don't know is having displeasure, wants to control
Yes.
my behavior, and I'm at risk it, in
Yeah.
different levels, whether
Mhm.
I comply or not.
Mhm. Yes. No, exactly. And look at that. That's just a tiny little moment of coercion. I am going to try to make you
Mhm.
smile by
Mhm.
pretty much insulting you, by saying
Right.
what's the matter with you?
Right.
Why didn't you smile at me?
Yeah.
We ought to understand coercion when we see it,
Right.
so that we are able to at least have some kind of response. And as you said before, identify it when it comes in a bigger form.
Right.
Right. When it comes into the person who goes into an organization that's going to change the world, people don't join a cult, but
Right.
then in a very short time, it's not possible to leave because of labor extraction, at least,
Right. Right.
right?
Yeah, if
At
someone has
least.
no resources anymore
Yeah.
to make it, then and the people that do leave from those conditions, the amount of strength
Oh,
that it takes, whether it's leaving Gloriaville in New
yes.
Zealand
Hmm.
with nothing, right? And
Yes.
luckily now there's groups that are supporting the leavers and making it possible.
Hmm.
Up here, my best friend's daughter is a Native woman, and she was trafficked
Hmm.
in your more like the story that people like in a car
Yes. Uh-huh.
locked
In the
up in a
traditional
room
way,
in the
yeah, that we think of.
traditional way,
Yes.
right? And she now works administering grants that help women and children
Yeah.
get housing for 2 years. So they have their
Yes.
housing covered for 2 years so that they can begin to build, right? People talk about rebuilding. Well, sometimes you're actually building for the
For the
first
first time.
time,
Yeah. For the first
right?
time. Indeed.
Um, and so, yeah, that's a major piece. One of the other threads I was interested in, as my understanding is that when you did the investigation with the Buddhist organization,
Hmm.
that there was an attempt to understand the issues and help them change or course correct, or was it? Yeah, did you play that game? Because I played that game, and I think we
Yes.
had that in common.
Yes. I have to say that there are organizations I always hope for course correction. And
Yeah.
so um, uh, it, it, it is not that I want to bring organizations down, for example.
Yeah.
Um, it is that I want them to be held accountable for what they've done. And because what I think is that there are possibilities that you could learn. So, for example, for a while, for a couple of years, I did training on what you needed to have in place to have an organization that wasn't coercive.
Okay.
Right. So almost like the workplace. So
Yes.
like these were religious groups. They have a board of directors. They have a guru. They have a Zen priest. They have a Buddhist Rinpoche. They have
Mhm.
whatever they have. These boards of directors need to understand, in my view, what corporate America knows, which is that you can't use power to coerce people. So
Mm.
corporate America knows that because they've spent millions of dollars fighting, billions of dollars fighting cases, losing cases, and
Mm.
then trying to figure out how not to be sued again. And so they're good at it if they want to be.
Mm.
And so but these religious organizations, they don't have any clue because they've taken an oath of loyalty to the
Mhm.
leader. And so I was doing training for their boards of directors because I want them to change before they get into trouble.
Right.
Sometimes there's been some openings for change, but I have to say that they are few and far between because I think structurally, if you have to take an oath of loyalty to a leader
Mhm.
and to say that everything that person does is right, which is
Mhm.
what some of these spiritual and religious groups do, no matter what the rest of their content is, no matter what their
Right.
theology is. If that's what they're doing, then there's no board of directors that's going to be able to do anything about what the leader is doing in terms of labor instruction and sex trafficking because
Right.
they're loyal. They have to make that mental adjustment and they will say this. They will say, whatever happened to you, you may think that it was rape and that it harmed you, but the leader knows best. And so whatever he did to you was for your benefit. So if you believe that, then you cannot take any action in those situations. And the only thing left is for those people who have an opportunity to bring a lawsuit is to try to get people's minds adjusted to the
Mhm.
fact that
Mhm.
they are not above the law.
Mhm.
So the law is imperfect. We don't have enough
Mhm.
law. But if we can use what we have to teach these organizations that make a very big dent in their financial situation enough that they will think twice about doing it again,
Right.
that's about the accountability that we can do in the legal system.
Right. Right. And under capitalism, getting money is a meaningful act. I mean, a number of us survivors, like, especially, some of the rape survivors I'm in touch with regularly, part of the heartbreak is it's just ongoing. There's more of us.
Mhm.
We know that the longer
Mhm.
this
Mhm.
program
Mhm.
continues,
Mhm.
and especially in my case with like ISTA, where they've used my efforts and the group of people that made efforts for them to change, they've used that now to whitewash and say, look, we're all better and now we're amazing and we've changed when they have not
Mhm.
substantially, right?
Mhm.
Systemically. They've
Mhm.
scapegoated some people. They've,
Yes.
put a veneer on it.
Mhm.
Um, they've done all this training on consent, but then they weaponize it. Like, you don't
Mhm.
have consent to tell me that you hurt me.
Oh my. Yes, a kind of a circular logic
Yeah.
involved in some of that. Yeah. You
Right.
know,
Right.
that's one of the difficulties. I know you understand this because you've looked into this is that I have for example, another organization um that I've probably talked to 10 or 11, 12 people who've been harmed but not
Mm,
one single one of them has a claim in the United States. And so that's the limitation of the law. It's either been too much time
mhm,
because the statutes of limitations, that is, every state, every law has a kind of this is how much time that you can take to bring a claim. Well, if you look at some of the survivors of high demand, high control organizations, um, it takes a long time to come to grips with what happened to you. If you've been told that what happened to you was in your best interest because the leader knows what's best for you,
right.
and that's been embedded in your head and in your
Mhm,
life, then it takes a long time, and you may be out of time under the law by the time you realize. I had a client who it took her 7 years to realize she'd been raped. Now, it's
mhm.
very hard to explain that to a judge, right?
Because they're not
It's
educated
yeah,
in
exactly.
how it
Yes,
works, how the
that's it.
psychology, the emotional
Yes.
defense mechanisms, the need for safety. I had a 72-year-old woman over brunch, because this is how brunches are going these days, talk about having a memory from her 20s pop up
Yeah.
and
Yep.
that she just didn't remember it. She didn't. And then she was like, oh, my brother said I go on this date with this guy. And then I woke up and I was being gangbanged, but I
Yeah.
didn't have the words for it.
No.
I haven't even thought about it in 50 years.
Yeah. No,
Right.
it's not
And I'm not
uncommon.
saying she can go prosecute or anything, but
No.
like people need to understand from the outside, like the violence or the bad thing happens and you think we know. It's like marital rape. It wasn't even
Hmm.
called rape,
Right.
right?
Right. We don't have
And
words.
we don't have words. It is you submit, you
Yes.
endure, you do your job. And now it's like, no, actually, and there's layers of coercion there because women couldn't have
Hmm.
their own money, couldn't have
Hmm.
property. You had to stay in order for all these reasons.
Yeah.
And so we didn't even have a language for it. And so we might know, oh, rape, if I had been jumped in an alley with a gun, if a stranger came in my house. But the fact that I knew that guy for 6 months in that organization on my path to enlightenment,
Yes.
and actually some really bad things happened, and oh my god, that is actually rape. Like, it's a
Yeah.
shock
It is.
for
It
us.
absolutely is. Because we have to change the way that we're thinking about things. And I'm not a psychologist, so this is just me thinking about it and dealing with people. But I think that in some ways our brain constructs things to protect us, you know,
Absolutely.
right? And so at a certain point, the brain must be saying, must be, if there are any brain scientists listening, I'm sorry that I've slaughtered the I've slaughtered the knowledge base on brain science. But it just seems to me that somewhere along the line, then the brain says, okay, I think now maybe you can handle this. And
Mm,
it comes up. So,
mhm.
we were talking about statutes of limitations, and I thought to
Yes.
mention that in California, there's what they call a revival window, which just
Right.
opened.
Oh,
And New York had a revival window. It's closed now, but a revival
mm,
window means that, for example, let's just say a state has a statute of limitations of let's say 5 years on rape
okay.
or sexual assault, but you don't figure any of this out, or you're not in a position psychologically to do anything about it for 7 years or 10 years or 15 years under the laws of statute of limitations. You don't have a case, but
Mm,
both California and New York have opened what they've called revival windows. California has one that just opened. I think it's open for 2 years, and what it means is that you are able to bring an old case that
okay.
would have been barred by the statute of limitations of something that happened
Okay.
to you after you were 18 years of age. So there have been child revival windows. And
Okay.
now and they've had an adult revival window. They've, I don't know what they're doing over there in California, but they've had a bunch of revival windows. So for your people who
Okay.
are listening, if they should think about that because sometimes people say, well, I know it's been too late. A lawyer
Right.
has told me it's been too late. But if it happened in California, um, there's a possibility that that claim can be revived. That's what the revival window does.
And just I have 2 questions on that. One is, like, what is the average statute of limitations? I imagine it's, as you said, different state by state.
It
And then
is.
also, our big fear when that much time has passed or we've been sexually assaulted and these, like, I didn't go get a rape kit. I didn't, right? Like, what do I need for evidence? Because a lot of us are like, "Well, yeah, that really was rape, but it's been 10 years." We generally don't listen to survivors. Does it become he said, she said, and I'm gonna have to
There's,
pay a pound of flesh for every step as the survivor because we, like,
yeah.
re-traumatize, re-traumatize. Yeah, so
That can be,
mhm,
absolutely, that can be, but there are 2 things. Number 1, you don't have to have had a rape kit. Number
uh-huh,
2, you don't have to have witnesses because very few people witness
uh-huh,
rape, right?
uh-huh.
I think, and it is the case that if it is a case that a lawyer feels cannot be proven, they won't take that case.
Okay.
And it's not because, for me, for example, it's not because I don't believe that person.
Uh-huh.
It's because of 2 things. And you've mentioned capitalism now, so it will help you understand this. There are 2 reasons. Number 1, not because I don't believe, because I do. But
Mhm.
my job is to prove it to 12 people and a judge and make
Yeah.
them believe. And if I don't think that I can do that, then I'm not going to put that
Right.
survivor through it. That's number 1. But the
Yeah.
second thing is, we do these cases for no money unless we get a settlement or an award at trial.
Judgment.
And
Yeah.
so, law firms, this is a business, right? This
Yep.
is
Yep.
capitalism, part of the capitalist system. And
Yeah.
to keep the lights on and pay the attorneys, you have to be selective
Yeah.
about what case you can take. And it's heartbreaking, right? Because there are some really harmful things that have happened that for which there will be no accountability,
Yeah.
because we can't prove it. But some of the things that do prove it and that we have taken are cases where there are more than one victim and there are patterns.
Right.
Or there's you went to the police. Well, very few people do that, so that's not likely. I
Yeah.
told my mother, I told my
Okay.
sister. There are contemporaneous.
Right.
We're not looking for witnesses and rape kits. We never get that.
Okay.
It would be lovely, but
Yeah.
no, we don't have that. So
Okay.
we have to do what you and I have both done, which is investigations, talking to
Yeah.
people. Even people
Yeah.
that don't have a claim can be witnesses. People who had it
Right.
happen to them that don't want to bring a claim. People who
Right.
were there at the time and understood that it was happening. There are lots of
Right.
ways to prove it.
Gotcha. That's super helpful. It's we haven't really talked about the timing of our conversation, but there was the latest Epstein file release, the late
Ugh,
files. And so, as a context, it is so triggering and upsetting for so many women in particular
yes.
that this hasn't been accountability has not been a thing when we look at the number of people that have been involved and right just the context that is the legal system for us and then it's like well we can engage with it and try to use it as a tool in the ways that you do and others do but we are in a disempowering context or
Whoa, yes, yes.
mhm.
Yeah, all of it is completely discouraging to me. And I think, along with everything that you've said, although I will back up a moment and say there are some women who have settled
Okay.
under the and gotten money. So
Yeah.
again, the civil justice system, it's only money,
Yeah.
and he's dead. So we don't
Right.
have him to really shame and and guilt and all of
Right.
that. But there are some who've had some settlements, which gives some sense of accountability. But you are absolutely right in that many of his victims have not. I don't know if they will find accountability. Um, uh, the whole thing is discouraging, but the latest drop
Mhm.
of the files is discouraging to me because it shows me that the like we could all have we could all think that politicians are no good. I mean, no matter who they are, we could
Mhm.
think that, but when you look at people who had high level positions, uh, significant positions in society, whom we
Yeah.
looked up to as people with some kind of kind of moral center,
Yeah.
who were cavorting with Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah.
They were seeking his approval. At least
Right.
that's what it looks to me in many of the emails. People who were knowingly associating with a known child abuser.
Right.
It's incredible to me. And
Yeah.
it certainly tells me, as I'm sure it does many people, that we have a long way to go in holding those people accountable.
Yeah.
Because we look, it's unfortunate, but we look at other people who get punished, so to speak, and it sometimes acts as a deterrent, and that's part of what the law does, right?
Right.
I'd like to see all of these people who were emailing Jeffrey Epstein and saying gross and vile jokes,
Yeah.
knowing what he did. I would like to see them punished, and there is no legal accountability. So what do we look for then? We look for the public. We look for resignations. We look for people to be, kicked out of their recent, position that
Right.
they didn't even start with CBS. We look for,
Right.
for people to step down from Harvard. We
Yeah.
look at all of those things. People to step down from their positions in their law firms
Right.
because they were caught doing something that they thought would never be revealed, and they could have that front that they were upstanding people, and
Yeah.
now we know that they are not. That's discouraging to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And getting it into the light so we can have
Yes.
transparency, because I
Yes.
think also sometimes, like, we'll get really hyper focused on, like, for me, let's say ISTA, but I also understand ISTA is just a fragment or a mosaic tile in a much bigger picture, right? They're not
Yes.
really that special. They're kind of the same as many other coercive spiritual organizations, in my opinion. And so stepping back, right, to say, oh, in the context of this
Yeah.
nightmare of child abuse and child,
Yeah. I mean, really, unspeakably.
uh-huh,
And yet they did not think it was wrong. I
uh-huh,
mean, that's the only conclusion you can come to. They didn't
right,
know that years later their emails would be revealed, in the New York
yeah,
Times, and and they
right,
did not think it was wrong.
yeah,
Um, I guess, it's really hard to say, but
yeah,
I take some inspiration from Anita Hill, going back to her and our
yeah,
conversation at the beginning, because no one believed her.
right,
They were not able to believe that. And yet, since that time in the early 90s, that would be how many years ago? Math is not my strong suit, Kara. It's 30 some years
like
ago.
35,
35. Yeah,
36, something
35
about
years,
30,
something like
yeah,
that. We've made a huge difference in the workplace,
mm-hmm,
in the sense that if you work for a big corporation, I know this because I
yeah,
advise those corporations. If you work for a big corporation and you make a complaint about someone who has put their hands on you or has
yeah,
said things to you, there is going to be an investigation. If it's bad enough, they're going to bring in an outside lawyer.
yeah,
I mean, CEOs have been fired,
yeah,
but in the spiritual, religious, kind of high demand, high control groups that are
mm-hmm,
not under the umbrella of workplace law,
right,
they are able to get away with a great many things. And they do it. Here's another thing that
mm,
irritates me: tax free.
right.
It's like salt in the wound.
It is. Yeah, that really
Yeah, tax free.
irks,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Especially when they're making money and doing their whole money dance. Um, So, kind of, I think bringing our conversation to a close, we had so many wonderful
We did. We had a lot of tangents.
educational, yeah, the tangent. I think we've woven it back together into a fabric. Um, yeah, I guess what are you up to
Yeah.
these days? Yeah.
Yes. Well, I've done my stint in a law firm
Yeah.
litigating, which I loved, absolutely loved. Um, but now I've taken a step back and I'm working with ICSA.
Okay.
Um, and so I hope I'm going to see you in California at the
I hope
conference.
so.
Yes.
Yes.
Um, because I do feel, as I said earlier, that I can see that the law is not the answer. There is
Uh-huh.
no one thing that is the answer, and that it really requires a kind of interdisciplinary
Uh,
effort to be able to focus on coercion in all of the ways that it appears in our society, right?
uh-huh.
Because we don't understand it well enough,
Uh-huh.
and people are harmed considerably by it. So, um, I'm on their board and I'm working on the conference, which is in San
Wonderful.
Diego. I think it's in July. Do you know, Tara? I
Yes, I
think it
think
is
it's the
anyway.
1st to the 4th. It's an
Yes,
interesting little span, yeah.
yes. And then I am still working with clients, but I'm partnering with different law firms that
Okay.
because this is, as we said, this is capitalism, this is a business, and it
Uh-huh.
takes a lot of resources to do this.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm enjoying working in a less a strenuous litigation
Uh,
load, and
uh-huh.
and collaborating with different lawyers. We're bringing civil RICO claims, we're bringing
Uh-huh.
human trafficking and forced labor claims, and
Yeah.
all very interesting. The law still is fascinating to me, and so I keep my hand in it in that way.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to explore all of this with me. I hope it reaches lots of people who will continue looking into your work, and I imagine we'll loop back again
I
in
would love
some
to.
some period of
Yes,
time and see
yes,
what's changed, what's going on.
exactly.
Um, I'll have all the links so people can follow your Substack and,
Okay. And I'll
yeah,
give you
be
my email and you can put that up there too.
great so people can reach
Excellent.
out
Yeah. And
and
thank you for what you do, what you are
thank you.
doing. I can't say that enough for those of you who are out there, having people listen, providing them with information that is so important for them. It is, again, this kind of, it takes a village. It takes a bunch of different people doing a bunch of different things to
Yeah.
make some change in this particular area. And so,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I sometimes question all the free labor I've put in on
Yes,
whichever side.
but it's not coerced, right? It's not coerced free labor. So that's
No,
all
no,
good.
it is. It is. It is. All right. Well, thank you again, Carol.
You're
And
welcome.
people
Thank you,
reach out
Cara.
to you and we'll be
Yeah,
back. Take
excellent.
care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And please do check out the links that'll be in the show notes to follow Carol. And also, I'll put links to the International Cultic Studies Association, anything we've mentioned, so you can continue to educate yourself. And I hope you'll come back. Bye. Thanks for listening. Our theme music is Midnight Rendezvous by Sasha Ende. If this helped you sort glitter from gold, I hope you'll come back. And I'd love to hear from you at foolsgoldpodcast@proton.me.